I'm going to do something a little challenging, I think. I'm going to do a full-throated argument for UBI on the Bitcoin standard. And we'll see if I get there. Some of it's still a bit of an experiment as far as I can tell, but I don't think we have a choice. I don't think we have a choice. First of all, I'll tell you why. You turn on the news today and, you go on, let's say, Fox, right? You see Kamala Harris. Everyone's saying she doesn't know that NATO and Ukraine aren't the same thing. She misspoke on stage. What an idiot. People out there actually trying to tell you that she doesn't know what she's talking about. Now, I'm not the biggest Kamala Harris fan at all, and I have a lot of doubts about her competency. But if you're sitting there listening to a story where she doesn't know that NATO is and Ukraine, and that was the whole point of the war in the first place, if you think that, then you're getting, people are doing fake news on you. And you're listening to it, right? You're a victim of fake news then. If you're getting angry, oh, this Kamala Harris doesn't know anything about stuff. Not here to argue she's great at her job. Just trying to tell you that if you're angry about Kamala Harris not knowing the difference between NATO and what's going on with Ukraine and all that stuff, then someone is using a form of psyop on you. Likewise, I saw today the football player Herschel Walker. And this would be the other side of it. Herschel Walker last night said, I don't believe in evolution. And every single one of these make a couple bucks journalists went to a degree, the ones with the profile pics looking off into the distance, or maybe they're in some media shot by the time they're arguing about something on the one time they were invited on CNN or something like that, dunking on him. Everyone's dunking on him. What an idiot Herschel Walker is. He's so stupid. Oh God, evolution, what a moron. Right, but the truth is anyone who listens to simulation theory, for example, can actually cast a credible doubt on the theory of evolution. Now, I agree that science in its totality still declares it a theory. Not necessarily true, but within all the parameters and rules of science, it looks like it's still a sort of consensus. But if you just go back 20 or 30 years ago, at that time, you couldn't even question it a little bit. But now if you come and say simulation theory, you're dealing with an entirely different concept that looks like it has a lot of validity. So if you want to come out and say that there are alternative ideas to evolution theory, you can actually say that nowadays. You can have an intelligent conversation about that. And it certainly isn't a bunch of journalists dunking on you. Oh, you're so stupid. He's running for the Senate, for God's sakes. Not that senators are smart, but this is a competent man. He played in the NFL. He did all kinds of stuff that would amaze people. Herschel Walker, I think he even went to the Olympics for the bobsled. And then you even take a look at his son, right? If you talk about journalists and media, his son is probably, I think, destined to be one of the most persuasive people on the planet. He's as handsome a person as you'll ever find, and really coherent and makes tremendous arguments. And the quality of the son, I think, in some ways can tell you a bit about the father in this case. So I don't know Herschel Walker personally, but I've listened to him speak. He certainly doesn't sound like an idiot. And I'm not saying he even has a healthy take on evolution versus creationism versus a sophisticated look at simulation theory or anything else. That's not what I'm arguing. I don't know the answer to any of this stuff. You know what's really a bad look? Journalists like the ones dunking on Herschel Walker talking about science, the same way they talked about COVID, the same way they talk about the war, the same way they talk about Kamala Harris not knowing that Ukraine is in NATO because she made a mistake on stage at one point. Now, she might be on drugs. She might be drinking too much. She might make mistakes when she speaks. I don't know any of those things, just like I don't know the truth about simulation theory. Of course, I don't know the truth about simulation theory. But if you go on Scientific American, if you go on Wired, if you go on any of these science, philosophy type magazines, you're going to see an argument that's pretty coherent and that says evolution is dumb and it doesn't make any sense, especially in light of simulation theory, which is gathering more and more adherents or people that think it fits with their worldview. Christians, Muslims, a lot of people can use simulation theory, and it sort of, can harmonize and dovetail with their own worldview. Evolution, not always. Now, once again, not arguing about what's right or wrong. I don't know any of it. I certainly see the force of evolution in nature, and there's tremendous amount of evidence that something like evolution happens and that things evolve, right? No one's arguing that. What we're just talking about is the big picture. Where does it come from? And some people say simulation theory. And if that's true, then a lot of the other stuff isn't. So if Herschel Walker wants to say that, fine. Now, I bring up all of this, the journalists, because in the end, when you look at what these people are doing, you got to admit something, that they're not exactly going to learn how to code after all this. A lot of what's gone on has made them maybe not capable of participating in the modern economy in the future, and maybe not even employable. Maybe they can't even have a job. I mean, if someone spent all these years laughing at other people online, writing for a publication, not making a lot of money, and basically just not making any friends or generating any goodwill in the world, what are they going to do? I mean, really, what are they going to do? You look at Canada's media right now. Canada's media is 100% subsidized by the government. It would not exist. The official, mainstream media, the television stations and the newspapers, all of them are subsidized. So eventually these media, without boomers around, without their demographic that's still consuming that stuff, the subsidies are just going to continue. They're not exactly getting, Herschel Walker's son, Christian Walker, to come read their stuff. He's on Instagram and on Twitter and having a great career, and people are following him there. But no one is going to these mainstream media channels. So we all know there's a problem. And in Canada, for example, with all of the ill will that was created with the trucker thing and the media, where would they go if there was no more subsidy? It's not like anyone would just hire them. It's almost the opposite of people being prejudiced against truckers at one point, saying you're not going to get hired if you gave money to the convoy, but the other might become true one day. You worked for the Canadian state broadcaster. Well, maybe you might want to look somewhere else to make French fries. And it's a big problem. But the good news is we can take inspiration from China. China has an incredible idea, and I think it might actually help Bitcoin in the future. And the idea is this. So China operates on these 5-year plans for their economy, essentially planned economy. And for the 5 years can definitely spill over if the plan lasts longer. From the time they joined the WTO in 2001 until 2019, 2020, it was all export led. The whole point of the economy was to get US dollars for selling goods abroad, and then internally stabilizing the domestic consumption economy through pegging of the currency and making sure that all consumable items have a non-inflationary price and that aren't reflected with all the wealth creation that was going on in the country. Basically cut off foreign flows of capital into the country, distribute it in a way that they thought was good, and then make sure there's enough left over for consumption to be relatively stabilized. So that's why they copied the Japanese and South Korean early battle plan of building really large ships, because you can sell those for a lot at once and get a lot of US dollars in once. And this was the plan for a long time. But just a few years ago, they came up with a pivot from just export led. And what they call it is the dual circulation economic strategy. So it's the dual circulation economic strategy. And once again, it admits that the way they use their currency abroad and domestically is two totally different things. That domestic consumption and the Chinese money abroad are unrelated in some ways, and that they would create relations between them that would help achieve different policy objectives. And the strategy basically is doubling down on domestic consumption. So versus the pivot from the old export led to the new one is domestic consumption, homegrown technology, international trade and investment, but certainly driving up the reserve currency status of the yuan. And here's a Twitter thread from a handle called Cultural Husbandry. And they talk about what this plan looks like and what it would take for the Chinese yuan to become the global reserve currency and sort of where it's at right now. So here's what they're up to make this part. So here are the two parts. That's the internal part. We see consumers, goods, services, international part of the Chinese currency, that's savings, increased collateralization of it, increased use of it, and increased use of it for funding mechanisms for all kinds of things. So the first part of this plan mentions that how hard China is trying to work to elevate the status of the renminbi in the world, the yuan. and what's going on with it. So right now, of course, they can't. We've mentioned on the show a few times, they can't just oppose or challenge the US dollar so easily. But here's where the movement is, if you want to see where some of the thresholds are, because that's what was really cool about what this person did. So first of all, you've got Saudi Arabia considering yuan denominated market for oil. We've talked about it on the show, but something I didn't know before that we've never talked about before is that they're talking about a yuan futures market. They're talking about a petro yuan. So a way for a vast amount of price discovery to have on yuan. When this happened for Bitcoin in 2017, it was one of the big reasons for which there was a ton of enthusiasm and growth. And a lot of the growth in Bitcoin over the past 5 years probably wouldn't have happened if there wasn't the ability to short Bitcoin, bet against it at a large scale in this way. So because that new institution sort of existed, it allowed the currency to get a lot more confidence and it allowed Bitcoin to grow. So what they're looking for now is that apparently about 25% of the entire oil production of Saudi Arabia goes to China. And it looks like they want that to be sold for yuan. And they want the futures market to come in to bring institutional investors and everyone who could bet against it, which theoretically can help build confidence because you can now do those kinds of things. Central banks, this is one of the big thresholds that she came to. So we've got this petro yuan and futures. The next big threshold that was mentioned that would change the world as far as how the Chinese yuan is viewed is the amount held by other countries. So it's already a reserve currency, but it's not a global reserve currency. And the difference is really just a matter of amounts. And what she says is $700 billion worth of yuan held by central banks around the world would bring it to that status. Right now, they're at about 290. So that would take more than a doubling to get to the 700. But it's predicted that it will happen, especially with oil now creating this huge market. You've also got Venezuela that is openly selling oil for yuan. So that's a big part of how this will grow. The way it all breaks down, I don't know if these numbers can come through on it. My font might have been a bit low, but we've got is the current supplies of global reserve. US is almost 60, 59.5. The euro is 20.5. The yen in Japan is 5.9, almost 6. And the yuan is 2.2. So the Chinese currency is 2.2. What this number would indicate, this doubling, it would have it pass the Japanese yen, which is what one of the predictions are, that it will pass the Japanese yen within 2 or 3 more years. So, big stuff there, big changes. But at the same time, all this planning is going on, and we see the goal to make the Chinese currency a global reserve currency and to elevate its status and to make it more interesting and attractive abroad. Internally, with the war in Russia and the implications of China and everything that it's doing with the United States has had some major effects on this relationship. So this internal part, especially when it comes to Chinese companies. So one of the big ways was to get international money still into the country through different companies. So I mentioned earlier selling ships. There's all kinds of ways to get stuff in. Right now, a lot of export stuff, they export all kinds of things, electronics and everything. So that's where the dollars are coming in. But the plan here is to actually make the companies attractive so that it'll bring foreign investment much more. But it looks like that's going backwards now. And this is also on Twitter, that the markets are basically imploding and that Americans are withdrawing at a high rate investment over there. But internally, the Chinese people have been buying the dip. They've been stepping into the market. So at once, it might look like there's foreign money that's no longer coming in anymore. But the anticipation that it looks like President Xi had when he first announced this pivot from from export-led to dual circulation is that local people are actually starting to participate in the market more. Apparently before, it was almost impossible. It was just real estate, and they want to pivot real estate and make real estate not speculative, but actually add access to Chinese companies, to Chinese people, with all of the Americans currently bailing. And with all of that, a big announcement happened just yesterday, and this is from Sofia Horta Acosta. And I recommend anyone follow her on Twitter because she does these weekly resumes of what's going on in the Chinese economy. There's no politics to it. It looks like she might be a little bit of a fan of the Chinese economy. So if you're not into that, it could be irritating. I know sometimes when I see her put exclamations and like, wow, a bit like cheering the Chinese Communist Party on. I'm not so down with that, but the information is good. So, I continue to follow her. And what she said in reaction to this Chinese meltdown is that they've pledged to keep capital markets stable. They're vowing to support all their companies overseas, and they'll buy those stocks if they need to keep valuations up. So a Chinese stock on an American exchange. And they're going to handle all the risks with property developers. So they're not going to allow defaults. The property market in China is probably a total scam, probably about to collapse entirely, just because it's been the only investable category for Chinese people for so long. It's their only savings deposit box, other than who has access to Bitcoin. It's really what has to be used over there. So, and then the last piece is that they've clarified they're going to end their big tech regulations. So the stuff on Alibaba, I mean, how much you believe that, I don't know. But it looks like big tech anyway has, sort of been managed and controlled. Now, when you add all this together, the plan seems to be this. It seems to be to increase the energy capacity of the place by at once making Saudi Arabia and other oil producing countries take yuan as collateral, thereby making those places and expanding the yuan petro market, so oil for yuan. And then, one of the most amazing things, I don't know much about healthcare, so I'm going to go through these because I'm going to be giving the Bitcoin version of this in a second. But we've got the electricity here. I don't know much about healthcare in China, so I'm going to skip it. But it is a consideration because within this dual economic plan, it's all about the health of citizens and all that stuff. It's in the propaganda anyway. This piece here is really, really amazing. I don't know if you know this, but the Chinese have been reforesting the Gobi Desert at an astonishing rate, more than anyone has reforested deserts in the world, I think. And I know we talk about terraformation on the show from time to time, and we talk about Bitcoiners going to the desert, and we're going to talk about that again today. But just know that the Chinese are actually doing it. They've actually gone to parts of the Gobi Desert and have already terraformed it and are already farming again. Because China is not like the United States in that there is no Mississippi River. There is no Mississippi Delta. There is no Mississippi watershed. The United States has a very unique and fertile land. Not everywhere in the world is like that, and not even close. And China had stuff like that apparently in its history, but overuse and ancient overuse, thousands of years or hundreds, have meant that parts of the Gobi Desert, which were once green, are no longer farmable, but they have become re-farmed again recently, just in the past few years. And their findings are actually incredible. What they've managed to do there, if you see some of the pictures and the videos, and using people from all around the world who have come in and really experimented. And China has been great at that with nuclear power, for example. Right now, it's only about 5% of their total energy supply. About 50 gigawatts of total energy in China is from nuclear, but they're going to put about 30% of that in the next few years more. So we'll be up to about 70%. Pretty soon, not quite 70, but 7%, not quite 7%, but moving up quickly, and that's about 70 gigawatts. So pretty interesting stuff. And then all of their work on infrastructure, we can't deny that they've been so successful. Their trains, the stations. I mean, it looks like there's some issues and some engineering troubles and a bit of corruption but all the kind of regular stuff. I don't think if we built a high-speed train across the United States today, we wouldn't see some troubling mistakes and things like that made. You got to give even the CCP, I think, credit on the train. Not to say that there aren't things you can condemn them for along the construction of it, what they did to Tibet with it. None of it is good, right? None of it is like not. A lot of the stuff that happened around the train, you could argue about. The train itself, the engineering feat, the ability for local Chinese people to ride on a beautiful train, high speed across their country to almost any place, is nevertheless an amazing achievement. Amazing. And I've been on it. I thought it was one of the most incredible things from, just seeing how far China had come, that this was possible, that people were riding this train. So we can't say that this international piece, whether or not they stole the technology for that to build those, this is a train line, by the way, this is infrastructure, if it makes any sense. So we got trees and a train. This is actually a street, but I don't think it's coming through. So we'll pretend it's a train. So we've got energy, health, reforestation, terraformation, really, and infrastructure and all that. Now, the way it should fill out is that they promise more property rights, right? That's that part to get more Americans to invest, and even locals, when they want to invest in things, apparently property rights are a big part of the second aspect of it, right? A big part of the second aspect of it. But of course, social credit is all attached to that, and social credit has all of these UBI implications, right? So if you are going to be on UBI in any country, I imagine there's going to be some kind of incentivization model around it to make sure that you do X, Y, and Z in order to qualify for the thing. So if anyone, even in America, thinks that UBI isn't going to be a massive dopamine dealing incentive manipulation structure, that's where it's headed. Whether we get a Bitcoin standard or not, I think there's going to be some form of consumption and incentivized behavioral manipulation. So that's all part of that internal piece. That's why social credit came on right now. It's to help really become more efficient between the consumption side, what things are costing, what people are buying, what people are doing, and the foreign side where the renminbi, the yuan is being pushed into energy markets in particular, and then national balance sheets after. So all of that's happening. Now, on our side, in the United States of America, an amazing thing happened yesterday. A favorite of this show, Michael Shellenberger, who wrote a book recently called San Fransicko, and which actually ended up getting adopted almost instantly by London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, to deal in a totally 180 way of the problems that have been dealt with for drug use and homelessness and all that stuff in San Francisco. Totally 180, adopted many of Michael Shellenberger's prescriptions. Michael Shellenberger, before his book, San Fransicko, actually targeted US energy and nuclear energy in particular as probably the easiest way to solve all global warming problems. He's a fellow who's testified in US Congress to both this and the homelessness problem. A really smart guy. He's running a lifelong Democrat. He's been in all kinds of environmental groups, Sierra Club in his life, and all that stuff. And now he's going to be running as an independent. And usually you say independent, I don't know. They never win in the United States. It's two parties. Michael Shellenberger is different. And Michael Shellenberger, having led nuclear power in America, and also now, even in San Francisco, you can see they have these $15,000 tiny homes set aside from the downtown core for homeless people to try and get into some degree of safety and away from drugs and try and get healthy. And it looks like these things, they're getting residents. They're already moving in. This is part of Michael Shellenberger's prescriptions here. Big into psilocybin as well as a health measure to help these people. And when you start seeing all the stuff that Michael Shellenberger and that's possible, the things he knows about, the things he's expert in, the things he can actually affect and change, and now his new candidacy for California, it helps us, or it can't force us, or we can't help ourselves but to go and picture what a Michael Shellenberger governorship looks like. And in the end, I think it could actually look a little bit like this Chinese dual circulation economic plan. It looks a little bit like this, and I'll explain why. Basically, you can, in the same way that people have this plan for the yuan to be a global reserve currency, a lot of people have that plan for Bitcoin, and it's being affected all over the place. We see it as savings technology, right? Instead of the balance sheet part where China is trying to convince other countries to put on their balance sheet, you see in Bitcoin, individuals are saving in it. So it's becoming a big part of personal balance sheets for sure. You see it used more and more as collateral. You hear a lot of Bitcoiners say it's the greatest collateral in the world. There isn't better collateral. It's pristine collateral. It's still a risk on collateral according to Wall Street. But in a world where it's the reserve currency, of course, it's not risk-on collateral anymore. And if it's not risk-on collateral, there's a million things you can do with it, right? If it is that risk-free, almost like a government bond type collateral, there's a million things you can start doing it, even funding infrastructure that we never thought possible before. And if you add all that up together, we can do the energy, with Bitcoin. We can do healthcare. I mean, Bitcoiners and psilocybin and health prevention, really, with the dieting. We talk about that a lot. The reforestation piece, we talk about that a bit too, that Bitcoiners' diets with all the cows and the protein, really to reforest the desert, you can also just bring cows. And if they poo everywhere, you can start farming it with a bit of water in no time at all. And then infrastructure is one we don't really talk about too much, but we saw Bitcoin migrate, of course, infrastructure, machines across continents in a short amount of time. But my prediction is here, once this collateral piece becomes stronger, you're going to see way more funding of stuff that can really be effective. And one of them, Eisenhower built after World War II, the Eisenhower highway network around the United States. Well, here's an idea that I would like to contribute to the Michael Shellenberger California governorship campaign. And it's more or less this, that we've got all these people in California that are going to be like the journalists who don't know about what's going on in the world, and then you can't hire them because they're too stupid, and what are you going to do with them? So there is sort of this UBI need. I think, China acknowledged that there's people that they're going to have to feed. You're not going to be able to do it. And I think even Michael Shellenberger is not ever going to propose a plan without the correct amount of empathy in it to take care of the people on the streets of Los Angeles and the streets of San Francisco. I mean, he's building his entire campaign around empathy. And I think that's good. If Bitcoin is going to make it in the world, there's got to be a plan with a lot of empathy to deal with the people who ain't going to buy Bitcoin. Those journalists that are laughing at Kamala Harris and Herschel Walker, they're not going to be Bitcoiners anytime soon, I don't think, right? Like, they're going to take a long time to convince some of these people. So what do you do, right? What do you do? Well, here's the idea. Michael Shellenberger, if he becomes the governor of New York, we can guarantee one thing: United States is going to get more nuclear power than we've ever had, and it's going to be in California because he's a fan. This is probably one of the other reasons why he's running. He really wants nuclear power to be the main driver of American technology. But here's the idea. We talk a lot about nuclear power, Bitcoiners buying a nuclear mine. I'm talking about something even different here. I'm talking about Bitcoin being used as collateral to finance the purchase of a nuclear mine in order to terraform land. And you can do that in California. California has enough desert that if you finance nuclear powered Bitcoin mining reforestation, I don't think a sentence that's ever been spoken in English before, but it's a real sentence. Everything you need to know is there. Nuclear powered Bitcoin mining terraformation. And basically using Bitcoin as collateral to build a mine at the same time as putting it in a place that could use terraformation, using the energy, and then doing what China did in the Gobi Desert to remake it. The infrastructure piece, the part where I was mentioning Eisenhower's highways and all that stuff, well, here's another thing. So I'll be in Vermont this year. I'm going to be buying a little property on a river, and I'm going to run a little EV store out of it, like a modification of bicycles, modification of whatever you want. And there's a 40-mile stretch of former rail path along a river that goes all the way to Lake Champlain. And I'm going to be building bikes, putting electric motors on them, and hopefully get a fleet. Well, what if there was some kind of toll, just a Bitcoin, right? Not a whole Bitcoin, but some Bitcoin, right? Where people put Bitcoin, voluntarily, if you took the track, you could put a bit of Bitcoin in. That Bitcoin could become collateral to then finance more track just built independently. Unlike Eisenhower, who needed to engineer a uniform highway for automobiles, I'm talking about bike paths. I mean, they can cost almost nothing to build, almost nothing. And as long as someone can borrow a bit of money, get a bit of work, get paid to create a track, we can actually expand track decentrally around the United States. We can actually have EV electric bike networks that cross the entire country. And we could probably finance it through some Bitcoin scheme somehow, using its collateral, using a toll as collateral. And you can imagine all kinds of things on the track that would be useful, eating, and people would pay like a rent in order to be on there for the track as well. All stuff that would help upkeep the track and make the track useful for everyone. And in the end, with this scheme, you could have some crushed stone, some paved, some cobblestone. You can start imagining a world where, people, anyone for not a lot of money could come to America, travel the whole country, stay in some pretty inexpensive housing, use the network, and get cheap energy. and maybe not see the desert because there might not be any deserts anymore. We might make all the deserts beautiful and green and we'll have more parks. I guess we'll have to leave the Grand Canyon alone because it's the most amazing place in the universe. But there'll be some green, beautiful stuff in places that were, inhospitable before. So Michael Shellenberger running, we got to get Bitcoin in front of him. We got to help him think through a bike plan. This is still a work in progress, the bike plan piece, but it can work. It can work. So that's the show. We use the Chinese model of the dual circulation economic strategy. And I didn't tell you the best part. What is the UBI? What do we pay them? It's US dollars, of course. I mean, that's the consumption money. These guys went for years. They went on and on and on and on and on and on for years about how to measure inflation. In the end, they made it the price of a candy bar. So I say they get what they asked for. I say if they take out real estate, if they take out all these things from the calculation of CPI over the years, and they make CPI the consumer number, well, you get what you asked for. Candy bar money, coffee money, UBI.